This holiday, discover meaningful gifts for everyone on your list at Kay. Not sure where to start? Our jewelry experts are here to help you find or create the perfect gift, in-store or online. Book your appointment today and unwrap love this season, only at Kay.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast with Stephen Topless.
Hello and welcome to the 1865 match report as we look back on Forest's goalless draw away at Sturm Graz in the Europa League. A game which on another day Forest would have come out with all 3 points and fairly comfortable victory, but that same old problem of not taking chances when on top means that the Reds have had to settle for a point. Not a disastrous result in the circumstances, as we'll talk about later, but nevertheless, we come away from the game thinking what might have been once again. I'm Stephen Topless, and I'm joined live from Austria, fresh from the game, by George Edwards. Welcome, George.
Hi, Stephen.
How's your day been? Because I understand you flew out to Austria earlier this morning, and then you've been there all day and at the game. How's it been?
It's been phenomenal, really. I mean, I started the day, I couldn't get to sleep last night because I was so excited. I think I had 2 hours sleep this morning, woke up at 4 a.m. I'm London-based, so I got the first tube across to Liverpool Street and up to Stansted. And, you know, from the second really we walked into the airport, it's a sea of red to the departures lounge, Forest fans everywhere you go. The flight that we were on just felt like a Forest chartered flight, really. There was less sort of normal people than there was Forest fans. It was incredible, really. And then you go to the train and there's people on the train. And I said it at Seville that the game almost, until you're at the stadium, the game feels insignificant in a way because you're just so engrossed in the fact that you're going on this away day to Europe to watch your side. And after the game as well, one of the Sturm Graz fans said, "Oh, it's so good to get a draw against Nottingham. That feels like a win." For us to be in that position where a team is so happy to draw against Forest, when for the last sort of memory of my life, really, we've been languishing in the Championship, going and getting 0-0 draws away at Sheffield Wednesday and being disappointed. And now we're going to Sturm Graz in Europe. And, you know, it's just such a magical day. And, you know, we'll get onto the game. It wasn't the most inspiring game. It's nice to get a clean sheet and the performance as well. But yeah, the game almost around the experience is a bit insignificant, really. Obviously, if we got tonked, you'd be fuming, and if we win, it's even that much better. But just to be able to be in Europe to watch your team is something special. And if you can, by any means, even if you can't get to the stadium, I'd encourage you to, because it's just magical.
And that's what these European away days are all about. Somebody else who was there in Austria was our newest addition to the 1865 team, Katie Campbell. You may know her from the blog, A View from the Clough Stand, and she joins us now to bring her reaction from events at the Mercure Stadium.
I've just left the Mercure Arena where the atmosphere was absolutely electric. The away end was constantly bouncing, constantly singing the new chants that have been created throughout the day, but also those Sturm Graz fans behind the goal were absolutely brilliant too. They had synchronised scarf movements, synchronised jumping, and it was just brilliant to see. And there was friendships being made between the two sets of fans. Scarves were being passed under the glass barriers, and it was just brilliant to see. But the atmosphere's been amazing all throughout the day. Everywhere you've gone in Graz, you've seen a red shirt, a red scarf filling all the bars around the city. And it's just amazing to see how many Reds fans have made the trip over to Austria to come and watch the game. On the performance, Forest completely dominated, and the only way that Graz looked like they were going to score was through a mistake or maybe a set piece. But saying that, Forest were also toothless in front of goal, and we never really looked like scoring either. The talking point will be Morgan Gibbs-White's missed penalty. He did convert from the spot against FC Porto in the last Europa League match week, but the question will be asked this week, should he have gone the same way that he did last time? Last time he went towards the left bottom corner, this time he chose to go to the right bottom corner, but it was a simple save for the keeper.
Thanks, Katie, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future on 1865. Before we get into some of the points that Katie raised there, George, let's have a quick look at the team news to begin with. And Sean Dyche made a number of changes to the Forest team for this game. Notable absentees included Elliot Anderson, who wasn't involved even on the bench. Murillo dropped to the bench. There was no Chris Wood, of course, through injury. No Tyrell Wanyi because he's not in the European squad. No Igor Jesus because he's suspended. So we had Arno Kaliumwendo up front. So the team was John Victor in goal, a back four of Nikola Savona, Nikola Milenkovic, Morato and Nico Williams. A midfield base of Ryan Yates and Ibrahim Sangare. In front of them, James McAtee, Morgan Gibbs-White and Nicholas Dominguez. And up top, Kali Mwendo. It might have even been a back three, actually, looking at it with Savona, Milenkovic and Morato and Williams pushing out to left wing back. What were your thoughts when you saw the team, George? And do you think that the changes made were the right ones, given the circumstances and the opposition we were up against?
Yeah, I think me and Granda were talking on the train down. I think that's what we were expecting, really. The one thing I didn't agree with, and I said before the game, and then looking at the game, I think you can sort of agree with the standpoint, is Matt Sells not being in goal. I know he's not had the best start to the season. He doesn't look as confident as he has, towards last season when he won the Golden Glove, but his position is in no doubt. And I think goalkeeper, maybe in the Carabao Cup, yes. Rotate goalkeeper, FA Cup, yes. But as much as Forest aren't, at this stage taking the Europa League that seriously, it's still their priority and it's still something that they really intend to qualify for. So for me, I think Matt Sells just has to play. It's needless rotating your goalkeeper and there isn't really competition for places. So that's the one I wasn't too sure about. I thought Morata would play, and second half particularly was absolutely immense. And it makes sense to sort of rest Murillo. He's still maybe coming back from that injury that he had sort of last month. So it's a wise decision there. I'm so glad Dominguez got another start. I think it's his first start since Sunderland, isn't it? But I think he's such an important player, and you saw by his performance how key of a miss he's been. And you mentioned it before we started recording, Stephen, that Nuno almost has screwed us over, because if we had our time again, I'm sure that we'd have Amara Hutchinson and Tyrell Wanyi in the Europa League squad, and they would have almost certainly started that game as it was. And Dominguez did really well, I thought, but we had a sort of winger that's not a winger on both sides. And then up front we had Callum Wendo, who sort of went missing. So I wasn't really too surprised with the team news. Yates and Sangare is also something that I think has never really worked for Forest, but it's starting to look a little bit better. So yeah, no real surprises there. But I think Forest priority, and that's made clear, is the current Premier League situation they're in by the team news that we saw.
Yep, and that was clear from the rotation that we saw tonight. Despite all the changes, I thought Forest got off to a good start in the game and they were on top. They had good possession. They looked the more likely team to score as they put the pressure on the hosts. I mean, it wasn't quite as fluid as some of the football was against Manchester United on the weekend, but it was still promising, George, because players were looking lively and looking to create things. In particular, Nico Williams was looking good, and so too Ibrahim Sangare. James McAtee had some nice touches to begin with, and yeah, it looked like Forest were building up a decent rhythm early on.
Yeah, it was a really good start to the game, and to be fair to them, Graz came at Forest straight away, which I think you expect as the home side against this sort of big European side. You want to ruffle some feathers early on and maybe get Nick ahead or just disrupt something. But I thought Forest handled that really well. They didn't let Graz have that moment in the game. They pushed on, they pressed high up the pitch, and they went back at Graz. And within sort of 5 or 10 minutes, they'd really got the game exactly where they wanted to. I think they had control. The two saves that Victor had to make come in the first half, and I don't think he did anything in the second half really. But you felt a dominance by Forest and an acceptance of the fact that they were this sort of Premier League side who should be going to Graz and dominating. And with the changes and the situation going to Graz, who treat it like a cup final, as we sort of see by the celebration of getting a 0-0, they're not just going to walk over. That they went there really for a point, if you look at it, and they made it hard for Forest, particularly with all the changes. McAtee's first start since, did he start Sunderland? But his first start in a while. A lot of first players playing together. Callum Wendo's first start. So it's never going to look as fluid, particularly when, even if Forest's first team play at the minute, they don't really look that fluid going forward. But I thought particularly midfield they bossed it. I think that left side worked really well in the first half. I think Williams, but the key factor to that for me is Dominguez. I mean, the bloke, he's just, I really love him, and I think he's been such a miss from last season. He's not obviously played that much, with the injury that he carried on from the last game of the season, but Williams was in so much space because Dominguez is so clever. He just took two men away into midfield, and every time Sangare looked up, Williams was in space, and he played it out to that left hand side. And then Nico obviously does well to earn the penalty, and pushes Forest on down that side. But Dominguez is just such an important player. He's not been. I know he's played on the wing before, but mainly off the right, left wing. He's not often played that position, but he just does it. Obviously, he's never going to be a threat really from a wing perspective, but he just makes it work. And I think to play 90 minutes, that's a real positive sign. And he's not your Anderson or your Louise who looks good on the eye. He's not your Yates who goes bustling into people. But I think the work he does just goes so unnoticed. And it's not a coincidence, I don't think. Obviously, a lot's been different from last season, but the fact he's not been in the squad, I think, has been crystal clear. So, yeah, a very good start from the half from Forest. I think the right side was pretty non-existent. McAtee, you mentioned, had some good touches, but, I never really felt threatened by him apart from those one move that he did well in. But you wouldn't expect anything more from how Forest started the game, and they had relative control, like you say.
McAtee did have a big chance for Forest to take the lead in the first half. It came from a well-worked free kick from the left-hand side. The ball was rolled to the edge of the penalty area. McAtee ran onto it. First-time effort with his left foot, and he steered it just the wrong side of the far post. If that's the other side of the post, the keeper's nowhere near it, and it's a goal. And maybe something like that, he just needed that to go for him, McAtee, just to give him a bit of confidence, because he did everything right bar putting it the right side of the post in the end.
Yeah, and when you see Dominguez shaping up to take a free kick, I was a bit like, what's going on here? We've got McAtee, we've got Gibbs White, we've got Williams. Why is Dominguez taking it? So you're thinking something unorthodox is going to happen, because I wouldn't imagine Dominguez would be the first candidate to sort of swing it into the box or try and have a shot. So, yeah, very clever from Forest. And having somebody like McAtee, who's obviously been in the Manchester City first team, played in the Champions League, he's going to have that bit of different thinking about him. So whether that came from him or from the set piece coaches or whatever, that's a good move. And yeah, it's just unlucky. He does well to evade his markers, to find space and to find a place where nobody's blocking the ball really, but obviously just a bit far wide. So it's a big chance for Forest, and they almost needed that. In games like this, it's so important to get a goal in the first half, I think, because you get to half time at 0-0, and then the longer it ticks on, and you just sort of get into a more frustrated rhythm. And then in the end, as Forest did at sort of 70 minutes, you have to think, right, well, it doesn't matter, we're going to score, we can't afford to lose. Whereas if you get that goal in the first half, it completely changes the game. Sturm Graz have to then come at Forest and, in front of their home crowd, they can't just think, oh yeah, we'll try and sort of damage limitation. They've got to go for it. And then the game opens up. But, it just wasn't, it doesn't look to be for Forest from an attacking sense at the minute, shown by the incident that we'll come on to, I'm sure, in a few seconds.
Yep, so Forest did have an even better chance to open the scoring a bit later on, and it came from a free kick which was hoisted towards the back post. Nikola Milenkovic got up and nodded it back into the 6-yard box. Ryan Yates was there. He got his header on target, but it was cleared off the line by Aryan Malik. The problem with Ryan Yates' finish is that he put it directly where the defender was standing so he could make the clearance, whereas if he'd put it in either corner, it would have been a goal and Forest would have been 1-0 up. I don't want to be too critical of Yates because he's got himself into the position in the first place, but you think in a game like that where we have toiled, we haven't created loads of chances, that's got to go in the back of the net, surely.
And he was an annoying player when he first came through because of his height, but he couldn't head the ball, could he? But then he really progressed that. In that promotion season, he scored 3 or 4 very vital goals with his head, and then since then has almost always posed that threat. I mean, the first thing I've noted to say is Forest won 2 headers from a set piece. I mean, I can't remember the last time that's happened, even to win one, let alone two consecutive headers in a penalty area. So that's real progress from Forest. Given the height they had, I think you'd hope so. And yeah, I think Yates had a bit more time maybe than he thought. It didn't sort of flash at him. Obviously, situations like that don't come that quick, that slowly, but either side of the post and it goes in. But that's football, From a heading perspective, it's difficult to say he could have done much different to that. I just think from an attacking sense, it wasn't Forest's day.
Sturm Graz did have the ball in the Forest net, but it was ruled out for offside. But it came from an opportunity, a shot that they had, which John Victor saved, but in doing so, parried the ball back into danger. Maurice Malone was there to tap in, but thankfully a review showed that he was offside, and I think the linesman had flagged anyway, so the goal didn't stand. Now, John Victor, in his last appearance for Forest in the League Cup defeat at Swansea, didn't exactly inspire confidence, and he didn't then either with the way that he dealt with that shot.
No, it reminds me a bit of Lacademos, to be honest, in that the Swansea game, either he just parried it into danger, or the goals that went in against Swansea, he just looked like he was nowhere near it. And maybe it's harsh, he's came into a foreign league. We can't expect him to be perfect overnight, and he's played two games, one in the Carabao Cup and one in the Europa League. So you can't be expecting too much from him. But they're the basics of a goalkeeper, and he does it later on in the half. I think a few minutes before half time, he does the same thing. A sort of very tame shot comes in. I think Baz in the group chat said it might have been deflected. I mean, I couldn't see that from where I was, obviously, the other side of the stadium. But I just thought you should be smothering that. You shouldn't be parrying it. And if you are parrying it, you need to make sure it goes well outside the penalty area, And yeah, it was a really on the ball. It's weird. On the ball, he's got so much confidence. He can be pressed. He can have three players there, and knows exactly what he's going to do with it, and does so with such composure. Yeah, when shots come in, you almost feel petrified and worried, and maybe that's what modern keepers are about. But I don't know about you, but I want my goalkeeper to first and foremost be able to comfortably stop shots and exceed confidence to his defence, which the defence, the back four or the back five that it turned into, looked absolutely solid. The weak link looked like the goalkeeper last night or tonight, as I speak, and you can't be having that going forward. So I think Sells sitting on the bench was sitting quite comfortably, shall we say.
And I wonder what Angus Gunn's thoughts were watching that performance from John Victor as well.
He's injured, isn't he, apparently?
Apparently. So, yeah, we'll wait to see if he makes a quick recovery after tonight. But let's go and talk now about Forest's big opportunity. It all started with a cross from the left-hand side from Nico Williams. It was handballed by Emmanuel Iwu in the box. Referee gave the penalty. At first, on the TV coverage, they cut to a shot of Callum Mwendo holding the ball, and I thought, well, that's interesting, giving the new signing the ball and maybe giving him the opportunity to get off the mark for Forest. But that didn't happen. He handed the ball to Morgan Gibbs-White, who is our regular penalty taker. But on this occasion, George, he couldn't convert. It was a weak effort, low to the left of the keeper, Christensen. He dived the right way and made the save. We then had a bit of a scramble where Ryan Yates bombed in to try and get to the rebound. He then went down appealing for a penalty, which on review didn't look like it was a penalty. But the main thing, George, is that Forest had another opportunity to score a goal and wasted it. And it was Morgan this time.
And that's the big one, isn't it? When you're in a game like this where it doesn't look like you're going to create many chances and it's scrappy, there's no excuse for missing a penalty. I know it can happen, but it's an awful penalty if we're being honest. From the situation, obviously, it comes from Nico once again being involved, once again Dominguez making space for him. And I mean, if you were watching on the TV, you might have seen me. I was literally, I think I was 4 rows up, and I was dead in line with it. So I knew straight away that his hand, and whether or not I don't think it was deliberate, but if that's a shot coming and going towards goal, it's definitely a penalty. So it has to be given as a penalty. And then there was a long wait, wasn't there? Because I assume VAR was looking at it. So Callum Wendo, which is what a lot of footballers do, they put somebody in there with the ball to take the heat off the penalty taker, and then they come along. I always expected Morgan to come and take that, as I know I wasn't captain on the day, but as the leader of the team from an attacking sense, and the guy that's been there the longest, really, apart from Yates, it made sense for him to take that. But I don't know. And Katie said, should he have gone the same side that he did against Porto? Regardless of which side he goes, he needs to make sure he gets something behind the ball. It's such a tame effort, and the keeper has to go the right way just to save it. If he guesses right, he saves that because it's not quite a P roller, but it's very poor. It's not in the corner. It's almost a perfect height for him, and I know he's had time to think about it and stuff like that. But I don't think you can excuse that, to be honest. I think it's a really disappointing moment from Morgan, who's, if we're being honest, had a disappointing season. We were hoping that the goal he scored a couple of weeks ago could sort of kickstart him, and it almost has. And I don't get as frustrated with him as some fans do. The tricks and flicks that he does. He gives the ball away a lot, and I don't mind that because
Yeah.
we've got to let him be himself and express himself. Because if we just get him to be more methodical and keep the ball, then he's not Morgan Gibbs White. So you've got to allow that. But in that instance, and I had full confidence in him to score. To be fair, because he's our leader, he's our captain, he's been there before. So it's just a real disappointment because that's the moment we needed to go our way to you know to spark Sturm Graz up, and then we could have the game exactly where we wanted. I don't want to quite say it's inexcusable because of how much credit he's got in the bank with us, and I don't want to be too harsh on him, but it's a chance really at this level you should be taking because it's the difference between 1 point and 3 points by the end.
And when you're a team low on confidence, like we have been for the vast majority of this season, when you're given an opportunity like that to score, even if it's just from the penalty spot, it's crucial that you make the most of those opportunities and you build on them. And in the previous game against Porto in the Europa League, we did that, but tonight we weren't able to. And as a result, at half time, the score was Sturm Graz 0, Forest 0.
The 1865 Match Report.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to this 1865 Match Report as we reflect on Forest's goalless draw with Sturm Graz in the Europa League. Now, in the second half, George, there were no changes made, first of all, by Forest. And I was hopeful that getting in at half-time, players would regroup and Forest would come out and play a lot like they did in the early stages of the first half. But it didn't really play out like that, did it? It was a bit more bitty, and actually the game got cagier, it seems, as it went on.
Yeah, it did. I just want to mention quickly before the break, you mentioned the sort of the Yates incident after Morgan missed the penalty. For me, I really don't think that's a penalty. I think Yates gets to the ball first, gets a touch on it, falls over as he does, and he wins them free kicks all the time all over the pitch. But that's never going to be a penalty, so I've got no complaints about that. And yeah, I mean, I said in the group chat as well, I expected half time for Forest. They got to half time 0-0, solid performance, reasonable dominance. They've obviously got Ndoye on the bench and Murillo, the sort of first team players, and there's not that much behind them, granted. But you're expecting their Premier League stamina and their depth to then carry them over the line. Graz have put everything into that first half. They've got to 0-0, really solid half from them. But you'd expect the Premier League team to then take control and to carry on, but it never really happened. I think Forest dominance almost faded. They started the second half okay, and then almost the spark just went out. Really, McAtee was completely non-existent in the second half. He did bits in the first half. Second half, it's like it wasn't there. There was a few upturning performances. I think Morato, to be fair, had an almost faultless half. He was mopping up after Williams, who was getting up down the left. It was winning headers. It was winning duels. I've not seen the stats, but I bet he won sort of 10 duels, defensive duels there. Really solid half from Morato, and it's nice to see him flourishing because I think a lot of us, me included, wrote him off, thought he was pretty hopeless. But once Murillo got injured, and once he wasn't playing left back that he was at Arsenal, but once he got put in the middle, he started to look a bit more composed and confident next to Milenkovic, and it's nice to see him. I think that game suited him really. They're not really a technical team that's trying to pass around him or beat him for pace. They're just trying to get it forward when they can, and he just cleaned up everything there. So a really good sign for Morato. The other one for me was Sangare, who I thought had a sort of 50-50 first half. He did well finding Williams quite a lot, but that felt a bit one-dimensional, and I felt he didn't really have much else. But second half, from a defensive standpoint, he really stepped up. He was doing what Morato was doing from midfield, tracking back, getting across, getting his foot in, and not things that you associate Sangare with. I've been quite critical of him. And I thought what his biggest liability is defensively, running back towards his own goal. But he really showed a different side of him there. So maybe it's been next to Yates, and that sort of defensive grit is there and is expected of him. So they're the two players for me that stood out in the second half. But Forest as a collective offered pretty much nothing for going forward. And I think that sort of disjointed forward line, that Calmando couldn't get a kick, and he sort of came deep but couldn't get on the ball. It all just looked a bit of a struggle for Forest going forward. And they looked solid enough defensively, but second half they never did anything to win the game really.
And on the bench, we had a collection of academy players, which is brilliant experience for them, but it would have been a lot to try them and throw them in that second half and expect somebody like Sinclair to come on and try and do something in the game for Forest and try and snatch something. So I could understand from Sean Dyche's point of view why he might have felt he didn't have a great deal of options available to him to try and freshen things up and try and regain some of the impetus for Forest. James McAtee lasted 20 minutes of the second half and then he limped off with cramp. He was replaced by Dan Ndoye, who didn't really do a great deal himself after he came on. And the game, it just it got more cagey. Forest didn't look as if they could muster any meaningful attacks, kept giving the ball away. But so too did Sturm Graz when they had it. And I think it turned into a frustrating watch in the second half because you could see that Forest were better than Sturm Graz, but didn't have the quality to take the advantage.
Yeah, they were better in 2/3 of the pitch, weren't they? But the final third, they just couldn't unlock the key. They couldn't find the right password to get through, and you have to hold credit to Sturm Graz for that. That's a performance that Forest would have been proud of a couple of years ago. In the Premier League when we were fighting for everything, and one of the big boys came to town. You'd be absolutely thrilled with that. You mentioned Ndoye coming on. I really can't decide what to think about him because he's really 2-footed. Probably with the best weak foot in the side. He can score a goal. He scored two very different goals. He clearly knows where to be. But I just as a winger, especially coming off the bench, you want sort of fresh legs. And with the sort of depleted squad that we had on the night, you think, right, okay, first team regular is apart from Hudson-Odoi, he's the sort of first choice winger on the right hand side. You're expecting him to come on and give this new energy, and he never did that. And Savona's had a tough old time of it on that right hand side. I think their most threatening player was on his side and didn't really do much, but he had that to contend with, and he also didn't have much ahead of him with McAtee, who, to be fair to McAtee, playing out of position sort of, and I did wonder whether McAtee starting in the middle and Gibbs White on the right might have unlocked a bit more of McAtee. But Savona had then when Savona has Ndoye come on, and Ndoye, he just doesn't come to feet, and it really frustrates me because Savona looks up and then Ndoye's just stood on his fullback. I mean, there's not much Savona can do with that other than lump it to him and hope he can play off it. So I've been disappointed with Ndoye, and I don't want to be too critical of him, but he's had real success in the Europa League before. Maybe the Premier League it'll come, but the Europa League he's had success in last season, and I'm just struggling to see it. And he can't really beat a man. He doesn't have pace. I just think he'd have that awareness to come and help Savona and to come off the bench with that drive that Forest lacked. They lacked that energy, that spark that a substitution, a winger who's in your first team and who's not started, who played at the weekend and is probably going to play next weekend, should bring. So I was just really disappointed with it because I thought McAtee was drifting to nowhere and it felt like the perfect change. And obviously it never really happened. And I think that was almost, from an attacking sense, the last roll of the dice that Sean Dyche could make, because other than that, you've got defensive players on the bench or youngsters who you can't really throw into that situation. So there's not much more Dyche could have done. It's just Forest, like I mentioned, from open play, even with Hudson-Odoi, Gibbs White, and Jesus on the pitch, they don't look that fluid at the minute. So put Callum Wendo and McAtee and Ndoye off the bench on, and you're never really going to have the answer, I don't think, unless you pounce on a mistake that Graz make.
Yeah, and to come back to the point there about defenders, Sean Dyche's last two substitutions of the evening were to bring defenders on. So Murillo came on for Morgan Gibbs-White, and then Zach Abbott came on for Callum Wendo. And actually, out of all the substitutes, Zach Abbott put in a really good shift and caught the eye, considering we essentially had down the right-hand side him and Savona, two centre-backs by trade, but they were giving it a good go between them.
Yeah, it was a very strange choice, wasn't it? Obviously, the subs made for Murillo and Morgan, which is fair enough. He's played 70 minutes. He's going to start the weekend and probably play the full match. So you've got to manage his minutes, and he can only play a certain amount of time. But then once Callum Wender comes down, you're thinking, all right, maybe put Morgan back on. Obviously, the game hadn't restarted. That's what I thought Forest would do. And then I looked to my right and Steve Stone shouting at Zach Abbott, and I'm thinking, sorry, what? How is that going to work? 4 centre backs on the pitch, 2 full backs. Apart from Ndoye, who, as I mentioned, isn't the most attacking player, your most attacking player is Nico Dominguez. So it was a bit of a strange one, to be fair. And I mean, Sean Dyche deserves credit because we've now got 2 consecutive clean sheets in the Europa League. We're looking more and more solid as we go on. And that was, Graz offered us completely nothing from a defensive standpoint. So the fact he's marshalled that over the line and we've not lost the game, he has to get some credit for it. But even when Murillo was coming in, I was thinking, just stick Murillo up front,
Yeah.
As I mentioned, from a
You
defensive
weren't the only
standpoint,
one.
we're not looking like we need Murillo there, but his flair, his physicality, his pace, and his sort of bullishness might disrupt Graz. And I know it might seem daft for people watching Forest who aren't Forest fans thinking, oh, why are they putting a centre back up front? But people that watch Murillo every week think that flair that he has was exactly what we were really missing up front. So it might seem like a rogue shot, but I was thinking maybe do that, particularly when Abbott comes on and you've then got 3 of them back there plus Murillo. I was thinking, yeah, just get him up there. But yeah, in the end, it was all about marshalling those 3 points home. I think Abbott, as you mentioned, did superbly well. He didn't know he was going to get past him, and he sort of got forward, won a corner, I think, or a throw in right up the pitch near the end. Supported Savona, who between them, both of them, as you mentioned, Savona a sort of right centre back on the back of a 3, and Abbott a centre back. So they did really well. And Abbott, he played in the Man City game and he didn't look out of place. And once again, he came on and he didn't look out of place. So it's a really solid option to have. And I think it's going to be a very tough task for him to get consistent first team minutes because of the nature of the Premier League. But if Forest can continue to, progress in Europe or get in domestic competitions and he can flourish in that, then who knows?
Forest did almost snatch it right at the death from a terrific shot from Nico Dominguez. It was a corner which was half cleared to the edge of the box. Dominguez, left-footed, first time hit. It took a deflection on the way through and crashed off the bar, and it went for a corner. Forest couldn't capitalise from that one, but it was also close to snatching all 3 points, and that would have been a spectacular way to do it. Unfortunately, wasn't to be. But Forest, on the whole, considering the changes we've made, considering the circumstances, and probably with Sean Dyche having one eye on Leeds on Sunday, a point with all that considered isn't a bad result.
Yeah, I think you probably have to look at it after Sunday and see what the result is, see who's played. And if we beat Leeds and get a point at Graz, then, that's fair enough. I don't know where we are on the table. I've not seen that. But, I think in the Europa League table, we'll be in and around that playoff spot. I think the win against Porto is huge and a win in this competition is huge because it elevates you up sort of 5 places. So I think we're comfortably still within the mix. I think automatic qualification was the aim at the start. But I think for Forest now, you've got to just get in the playoffs, make sure you're in that mix come January. But we've got to focus on the Premier League now because if we want to focus on the Europa League later on, we can't be in a relegation battle. So that's got to be Forest priority. Over the course of the game, I don't think you could argue about 0-0, to be honest. Like you mentioned, Forest had considerable dominance in the first half, and in the second half, you felt they were the better team, but they didn't really do enough to merit scoring. And given how much it meant to Graz and how much sort of hard work they put into the performance, I think a clean sheet, 0-0, it was certainly justified. Forest can't really have much complaints about it. And, you're hoping, obviously, Jesus couldn't play because he's suspended. He's back. Hutchinson, who would have been the perfect player for tonight, I think he'll be back. So we'll have a much bigger squad. Obviously, Hudson-Odoi with a dead leg. So you're thinking that'll be okay for Leeds as well. So we really have to beat Leeds, I think, for this result to look good. But in isolation, it's not the worst thing that could have happened to Forest, really.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, George. Because of the position we're in the Premier League, we are having to really focus ourselves on our league form and making sure that we don't get dragged into a relegation battle. So that's where we've had to make the changes that we have done for this game in Graz and trying to manage players such as Elliot Anderson, who's played a lot, even Nico Williams. I know he's played tonight, but in an ideal world, you want to rest him a bit more. But yeah, the main focus is Leeds on Sunday. They are a couple of points and a couple of places ahead of us in the Premier League table. It's a big game, isn't it? You don't want to say must win. I never like to say that going into a game because I think that it's a bit of a cliche sometimes, but it does feel like a game that Forest have to get 3 points from.
Yeah, I do. I do think they've got to win. I think they've got no excuses. I think they've got a better squad than Forest. They've got they've got a better squad than Leeds. They've got more Premier League experience than Leeds. They're at home, which is an undoubted strength from Forest. They've got some sort of defensive thing going on that means they look a lot more consistent from the back. Leeds are on the back of losing 3-0 last week, I think, didn't they? Forest have had a very good record at home against Leeds over the last few years. And, I mean, we weren't expecting to be in a relegation battle, but by the end, you'd think Leeds will be in and around that. You can't go gifting points to Leeds at all. And where we are, we're already getting cut adrift. West Ham have got a very good game against Burnley, and they're already 4 points or 3 points ahead of us or something. I think we're 2 wins away from sort of just becoming above water. So Leeds, regardless of what Forest ambitions were this season, has to be targeted as a win. Whether we're thinking we're going to be in a relegation battle or thinking we're going to be in a Champions League battle, Leeds at home, with respect to them, well, do we want to respect Leeds? I'm not sure. But with respect to them, it has to be a win. So, Forest have got to prioritise that. And I think we will, to be honest. I think with Ange, I wouldn't have, and the first time I've mentioned the 8 word in this podcast, I wouldn't have any confidence.
We've lasted 30 minutes and his name has cropped up. We did our best.
I trust Forest under Sean Dyche. I trust his selection. I trust the mindset. And I trust everybody in the City ground to be invested in what they're seeing. And that's the thing now, There's no disconnect now between the players and the fans. Everybody's back on side. Everybody's brought back in. Hopefully a few players are fit and, we can have another memorable victory against Leeds. We've won 2 in a row, I think. The 4-2 and the 2-0 are the 2 that spring to mind recently. So let's make it a hat-trick against that lot.
And also, just going into that game, one thing that gives me more confidence is it does feel like Dyche has stopped the rot somewhat. So we've only lost 1 of our last 4. And
that was Bournemouth, and we always lose to Bournemouth.
Where we always lose, of course, yeah. So, you factor all that in. You factor in the Man United performance, which was a lot better. Even tonight in Graz, I know it wasn't pretty, but Forest kept a clean sheet and it was effective. So all of those things, it does feel like we're slowly turning a corner and beginning to look a lot more like our old selves. And yeah, this game against Leeds on Sunday, it is massive, and it could be a pivotal one to really kickstart our season and get us back on an upward trajectory, certainly in the league. My thanks to George for joining me. Thanks also to Katie. We'll have our match report for you after Leeds. So until then, we'll see you soon.
You've been listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps other listeners find our content.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
They fought for us, they sacrificed for us, they put everything on the line to protect our freedom, and when they're wounded, they shouldn't have to fight alone. Fisher House provides no-cost lodging for military and veteran families near military and VA hospitals, ensuring that their loved ones can be by their side during recovery. Because no hero should heal in isolation. A comforting presence, a familiar voice, and the love of family can make all the difference. Stand with those who stood for us. Learn more today at fisherhouse.org.